When firefighters broke down the door of a mansion in Virginia, they found 2 charred bodies on the 2nd floor. But the real nightmare began when a detective noticed a strange crack in the floor of the wine cellar. Behind it was a 2nd basement where 5 women were being held in chains. Sheikh Saeed al-Mahdi flew to the United States at the end of August 2022. The 39-year-old member of Dubai's ruling family rarely appeared in the Western press, although his fortune was estimated at around $400 million. He spent most of his time between the Emirates and London, where he owned several properties through offshore companies. He did not visit America often. He was last seen in Miami 3 years ago at a yacht show. This time, his plane landed at a private terminal at Dulles Airport, near Washington. He was accompanied by Yana Kovalchuk, a 26-year-old model from Kiev. They had met 6 months earlier at a party in Monte Carlo organized by a mutual acquaintance, a Russian businessman involved in real estate in Europe. Yana worked for a mid-level modeling agency, modeled for clothing catalogs, and occasionally participated in shows at Milan Fashion Week. Her career was not spectacular, but it provided enough to travel and maintain the lifestyle she had dreamed of back in her native Kiev. After meeting Saeed, her life changed. He began inviting her to private events, paying for her flights, and giving her jewelry. Yana understood that their relationship had no future in the traditional sense. The sheikh was married and had 3 children, but she did not object to this arrangement. Money, attention, luxury, all this compensated for the lack of official status. Said bought an estate in Northern Virginia 2 years before his arrival, but he hardly ever visited it. The property was registered to a shell company registered in Delaware. The house stood on 12 acres of land surrounded by forest. The nearest neighbors lived a kilometer away. It was an old colonial-style mansion built in the 1970s, with white columns at the entrance and a long driveway. Inside, everything looked solid but unpretentious. Wood paneling on the walls, a fireplace in the living room, a spacious kitchen with marble countertops. Saeed rarely explained why he needed this house. He told his friends that he wanted a place for privacy where no one would ask questions. In the Emirates, he was always being watched by relatives, business partners, journalists. Here he could do whatever he wanted. The first few days after their arrival were quiet. Said and Yana hardly left the house. He worked remotely, calling partners, checking financial reports, discussing some land deals in Abu Dhabi. Yana sunbathed by the pool, leafed through magazines, and posted photos on social media. She didn't ask any unnecessary questions. Sometimes Saeed would leave for a few hours, saying he was meeting with lawyers or dealing with some real estate issues. Yana stayed alone, watched TV series, and ordered food through apps. She didn't know that there was a hidden room in the basement of the mansion, under the wine cellar, and she didn't know that someone was there. The fire started on the evening of September 12th. Neighbors noticed smoke around 11 p.m. One of them called 911, but the house was far from the road, and it took firefighters 20 minutes to get there. When they arrived, the 2nd floor was already engulfed in flames. The fire was coming from a bedroom in the east wing. The fire chief immediately realized that there might be people inside. There were 2 cars in the driveway, a rented SUV and a sedan. The firefighters tried to get in through the front door, but it was locked from the inside. They had to break it down with a battering ram. The smoke inside was so thick that they could hardly see anything. One of the firefighters climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, feeling his way. In the bedroom, he stumbled upon a body. A woman was lying on the floor next to the bed, with a man next to her. Both were dead. The fire had damaged their faces, making it impossible to identify them immediately. The bodies were taken outside. By this time, the Fauquier County Police and investigators from the sheriff's office had arrived. One of the detectives, Mark Lawson, immediately noticed some strange details. First, the bedroom door was closed from the outside, not locked, but tightly shut, which is unusual for a fire that starts inside a room. Second, There was an overturned canister on the floor next to the bed. Judging by the smell, it contained gasoline. An examination would later confirm that the liquid had been spilled on the carpet and set on fire. This was no accident. Someone wanted these two to burn. Lawson began his inspection of the house. Everything on the first floor looked relatively normal. No signs of a struggle. Furniture in its place. Dishes in the sink. There were fresh groceries in the refrigerator and glasses with wine residue on the table. It seemed like the evening had started normally. The detective went down to the basement. There was a laundry room, a small storage room, and a wine cellar, a room with wooden shelves lined with bottles. Lawson walked along the shelves, checking for anything unusual, and he noticed something. One of the shelves was slightly tilted, as if it had been moved recently. He tried to pull it, and it gave way. Behind it was a narrow door built into the wall. It was not locked. Lawson opened it and saw a staircase leading down to the second basement. He went down, holding a flashlight. Downstairs there was a smell of dampness and something else, a sour, unpleasant smell of unwashed bodies. The room was small, about 15 by 10 meters, with a low ceiling and concrete walls. In the corner stood a mattress. Next to it, a plastic bucket. A metal pipe ran along the wall, to which chains were attached. And on these chains sat women. 5 women, all naked, all in handcuffs. Lawson called for backup. A few minutes later, 2 more police officers and a paramedic came down to the basement. The women were exhausted. Some of them could barely stand. They were immediately freed from their chains and carried upstairs. One of them was crying. Another was silent, staring at a single point. The third repeated something in broken English. "Please don't send me back. Please." The fourth and fifth seemed to be in a semi-conscious state and had to be carried. All of them were taken to the hospital. An examination established that the women had been held in the basement for several days to several weeks. All of them had signs of beatings, abrasions on their wrists and ankles from handcuffs, and signs of dehydration. Doctors also found signs of sexual assault on 3 of them. One of the women, 24-year-old Marina, told investigators that she had been brought there 3 weeks ago. She is from Moldova and came to the U.S. on a tourist visa, hoping to find work. In Washington, she responded to an advertisement for a housekeeper position. She was given an appointment at a cafe, where she was met by a tall, bearded man with an accent. He said the job was in a country house and paid well. Marina agreed. The man drove her to the mansion, took her inside, and then forced her down to the basement. 2 other women were already there. He chained Marina up and told her she would work when the time came. She hardly saw him again. Food was brought once a day, usually bread, canned goods, sometimes fruit. Water was provided in plastic bottles. Another woman, 28-year-old Oksana from Ukraine, told a similar story. She too was lured with the promise of work. She arrived in the U.S. 6 months ago, lived in New York, and worked part-time as a waitress. She didn't have enough money and was looking for something more stable. She found an ad in a Russian-speaking group on social media. A caregiver was needed for an elderly person in Virginia. Oksana contacted the employer, and they agreed to meet. She was met by the same man who later brought her to the mansion. By the time Oksana realized she had fallen into a trap, it was too late. He was stronger than her and had a gun. She tried to scream, but he hit her in the face and dragged her into the basement. She spent 11 days there. The other 3 women hardly spoke. One of them did not know English at all and communicated through an interpreter. She came from Romania, and her story was vague. Something about an agency that promised work in Europe. Then she was resold and ended up in America. The second was from the Philippines, the third from Colombia. They all ended up here through different intermediaries, but the pattern was the same: a promise of work, a meeting with a man who drove them to the mansion, and confinement in the basement. The police began searching for this man. The description matched: tall, about 40 years old, bearded, dark-skinned, with an accent. Surveillance cameras at a nearby store recorded a car that regularly visited the mansion, a dark van with no identifying marks. The license plate number was identified. The car was registered to a certain Ahmed Suleiman, a 38-year-old Jordanian citizen living in Washington. The police went to his address, but the apartment was empty. Neighbors said they hadn't seen him for several days. No one answered his phone. Meanwhile, the identities of the victims were established through fingerprints and dental records. The man was Saeed al-Mahdi, a sheikh from Dubai, a millionaire and member of the ruling family. The woman was Yana Kovalchuk, a model from Ukraine. Investigators checked their phones, which had been seized at the scene. In Saeed's correspondence, they found messages with a contact saved as A. They corresponded in Arabic. Experts translated the messages, which were about delivering goods, new girls, and preparing the premises. The last message from Saeed was sent 2 days before the fire. "Come tomorrow evening. We need to discuss something." A theory began to take shape. Said did not just buy the house for privacy. He used it to house women supplied to him by Ahmed. Most likely it was part of human trafficking. Women were lured to the US under the guise of work and then held captive. Some of them may have been used for prostitution, others for personal needs. Said paid Ahmed for the supplies. But something went wrong. Perhaps Yana found out about the basement, or Ahmed decided to get rid of Saeed so he wouldn't have to share the profits. Or there was a quarrel. There was no concrete evidence yet, but the arson theory seemed the most likely. Someone wanted to cover up the crime by starting a fire, but didn't take into account that the women in the basement would survive. The search for Ahmed continued. His photo was sent to all airports, border crossings, and police stations. 3 days later, a lead came in. A camera at a gas station in Maryland had captured a van similar to his heading north. The police organized a manhunt. Ahmed was detained at the Pennsylvania border as he attempted to cross the state, heading towards Canada. In the car, they found a passport with a different name, a wad of cash, and a phone that he had tried to destroy, but didn't have time to. The data was recovered. There were messages with Saeed, photos of the mansion, and contacts of other people allegedly involved in human trafficking. Ahmed was taken to a temporary detention center. He refused to speak without a lawyer. When the lawyer finally arrived, Ahmed began to testify. He claimed that he had nothing to do with the fire. He said that he worked for Saeed. He brought women, looked after them, but nothing more. He did not start the fire. On the night of the fire, he was in Washington, D.C., and he had an alibi, receipts from a bar, and witnesses. Investigators checked and found that his alibi was partially, but not completely confirmed. He was indeed seen at the bar, but he left around 10 p.m. The fire started at 11 p.m. He had time to get to the mansion, set the fire, and return. But there was no direct evidence, no fingerprints on the canister, no witnesses who saw him near the house that night. The case had reached a dead end. The investigators went back to the beginning. Lawson and his partner, Detective Emily Zhang, began questioning the women from the basement in more detail. They wanted to understand who else might be connected to this story, besides Saeed and Ahmed. Marina, who had been held captive the longest, remembered some details. She said that another man, not Ahmed, had come down to the basement several times. He was younger, around 30, and spoke English without an accent. He came to check on the women and sometimes brought them medicine, painkillers and antibiotics. Marina thought he was a doctor or someone like that. He wasn't cruel, he didn't beat them, but he didn't help them either. He just did his job, silently, as if it were a normal routine. Lawson asked Marina to describe this man in more detail. She remembered that he was tall, thin, with light hair, and wore glasses. He had a tattoo on his arm, some kind of inscription, but she couldn't make it out. He didn't talk much, mostly asking if anyone had a fever or was in pain. Once he gave Marina some pills for a headache. Another time, he bandaged a wound on Oksana's leg. She had cut herself on the edge of a metal chain and it had become infected. This man came, treated the wound, and applied a bandage. Marina asked him why he was there, why he was doing this. He didn't answer, just looked at her and left. Zhang suggested that he might be someone from the medical staff, perhaps even legally employed, a paramedic, a nurse, or maybe a medical college student. Someone who had access to medicine and knew the basics of first aid. They requested data from hospitals and clinics within a 50-mile radius of the mansion, looking for employees who might fit the description. At the same time, they checked Saeed and Ahmed's phone records. Perhaps one of their contacts would match. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. One of the police officers working at the scene of the fire remembered seeing a medical bag in the mansion's garage. At the time, he hadn't thought much of it, assuming it was just a first aid kit, which every home has. But now, after Marina's words, it became important. Lawson returned to the mansion, which was still cordoned off as a crime scene, and found the bag. Inside were syringes, ampoules of saline solution, antibiotics, painkillers, bandages, tourniquets, and gloves. Everything was packed professionally, like in an ambulance. One of the ampoules had a sticker with the name of the pharmacy, a small pharmacy in Fairfax, 20 miles from the mansion. The detectives drove there. The pharmacy owner, an elderly man named Roger Patton, said that such ampoules were only sold by prescription or to medical institutions. He checked the database. These specific drugs had been ordered twice in the last month, once by a clinic in Fairfax and the second time by a private individual. The name in the database was Daniel Corrado. Roger remembered him, a young guy who said he worked as a paramedic and needed supplies for field work. He showed his license. Everything was in order, so Roger sold him the drugs without question. The police found Daniel Corrado within a few hours. He was 31 years old and did indeed work as a paramedic for a private medical company that served corporate events, sports competitions, concerts, and sometimes private parties. He lived alone in a small apartment in the suburbs of Washington, with no family. Neighbors said he was quiet, polite, and rarely socialized. When the police came to his door, he opened it calmly, without panic. Lawson immediately noticed a tattoo on his right arm, an inscription in Latin letters, something like a quote, but he didn't have time to make it out clearly. Daniel was taken to the police station for questioning. He did not deny that he knew Ahmed. He said that they had met a year ago in a bar, struck up a conversation. Ahmed learned that Daniel worked in medicine and offered him a side job to occasionally come and check on the health of people who needed help but did not want to go to the hospital. Daniel agreed. Ahmed paid well, $500 per visit, in cash, no questions asked. At first, Daniel thought they were illegal immigrants who were afraid of deportation. That's how Ahmed explained it. Then Daniel began to realize that it wasn't that simple. He saw women in the basement, saw chains, saw their condition. But he was afraid to ask questions. He was afraid that if he refused, Ahmed would do something bad to him or his family. Daniel didn't have a family, but Ahmed hinted that he knew where he lived and where he worked. Lawson asked how many times Daniel had come to the mansion. He replied that he had been there about 10 times in the last 6 months. Ahmed always called him, saying that he needed to check on the girls. Daniel would come, go down to the basement, examine them, give them medicine if necessary, and leave. He never asked any unnecessary questions. Once he asked Ahmed why these women were here, why they were chained. Ahmed replied that it was none of his business, that he should do his job and get paid. Daniel fell silent. Since then, he had simply done what was asked of him. Zhang asked if Daniel knew about Saeed. He nodded. He had seen him once by chance. He had come at Ahmed's request, gone up to the first floor, and there was a man there, well-dressed, with an expensive watch, talking on the phone in another language. Ahmed introduced him as the master of the house, said didn't even look at Daniel, continued his conversation, and left. They never met again, but Daniel understood that Saeed was the boss, that he was the one who organized everything, and Ahmed just followed orders. The investigators asked about the night of the fire. Daniel said he wasn't there. Ahmed hadn't called him for several days before that. The last time Daniel had come to the mansion was a week before the tragedy, to check on the women, and everything was relatively normal. No emergencies. He left, and Ahmed didn't call him again. When Daniel heard about the fire on the news, he was frightened. He realized that sooner or later the police would get to him, but he didn't run away. He decided to wait. Maybe he thought they wouldn't find him, or maybe he just didn't know what to do. Lawson didn't quite believe him. He asked why Daniel hadn't gone to the police if he knew something illegal was going on. He replied that he was afraid. He was afraid of Ahmed, afraid of the consequences, afraid that he would be accused of complicity, and he was afraid of losing money. Daniel was in debt, a car loan, tuition for his younger brother who was in college, rent arrears. The $500 per visit helped him stay afloat. He knew it was wrong, but he continued, because he needed the money, because he had no choice. That's how he explained it. Detectives couldn't charge Daniel with arson. He had an alibi. He was at work on the night of the fire, which was confirmed by his colleagues. But he could be charged with complicity in human trafficking and illegal detention. He didn't rescue the women. He didn't report them to the police. He continued to help them, thereby helping the criminals keep their victims alive so they could continue to exploit them. The prosecutor decided that this was enough to bring charges. Daniel was arrested and taken into custody. Meanwhile, they began questioning Yana Kovalchuk. More precisely, they began reconstructing her story because she herself had died. The police contacted her family in Kiev, her mother and younger sister. Her mother, Lyudmila, said that she last spoke to her daughter 2 days before her death. Yana called and said that everything was fine, that she was in America with a friend, relaxing. She sounded cheerful. There was no sign of trouble. Lyudmila did not know the details of Yana's relationship with Saeed. She only knew that her daughter was dating a wealthy man who traveled a lot. Yana didn't talk much. She was secretive in general and didn't like to share personal details. Investigators checked Yana's phone. In her correspondence with her friends, there were mentions of Saeed. She wrote that he was generous but strange, that he sometimes behaved unusually. He might leave in the middle of the night without explaining where he was going, or lock himself in his office for several hours without answering his phone. One of her friends asked if this was dangerous. Yana replied that no, he was just a busy man. But in another correspondence, a few days before her death, Yana wrote to another friend, "Something's not right here. I can feel it." Her friend asked what exactly. Yana replied, "I can't explain it. Just strange noises at night, as if someone is downstairs." Then she added, "Maybe it was just my imagination." She did not return to the subject. This correspondence made investigators think. Perhaps Yana heard women in the basement. Perhaps she began to suspect that something suspicious was going on in the house. If Saeed realized that she had guessed, he might have tried to get rid of her. But then why start a fire in which he himself died? The theory that Saeed killed Yana and then killed himself by starting a fire seemed strange. If he wanted to die, why choose this method? It would have been easier to take pills or shoot himself. Fire is slow, painful, and unpredictable. The investigators returned to the theory of a third party. Someone came to the house, doused the bedroom with gasoline, locked the door, and set it on fire. That someone could have been Ahmed, but his alibi held up. Zhang suggested checking the surveillance camera footage in the area. The mansion itself was not equipped with cameras, but there were cameras on neighboring properties and on the roads. The police requested recordings from the week before the fire and the night of the tragedy. A camera at an intersection 3 miles from the mansion captured Ahmed's van passing by around 9 p.m. on the night of the fire. He was driving in the direction of the mansion, but he was not filmed going back. Either he returned by another route or he stayed there. A camera at a gas station 10 miles away recorded the same van around 1 a.m. after the fire. It turns out that Ahmed was indeed near the mansion at the right time. Detectives questioned Ahmed again. They showed him the recordings. He changed his testimony. He said that yes, he had come to the mansion that night, but he did not go inside. Said had called him, asked him to come, said they needed to discuss something urgent. Ahmed arrived, parked at the gate, and called Saeed. Said did not answer. Ahmed waited for about 20 minutes, then left. He saw smoke on his way back, but did not think much of it. He thought someone was burning trash. Lawson didn't believe him. He asked why he hadn't mentioned it right away. Ahmed replied that he was afraid he would be blamed. The detective asked if he had gone inside the house. Ahmed said no. They asked if he had seen anyone else nearby. Ahmed said no one. But then, after a few minutes of silence, he added that maybe there had been. When he was driving up, he saw another car parked off to the side, near the woods. It was a small, dark-colored sedan. He didn't think much of it at the time. He thought it was one of the neighbors. The police began searching for this car. They checked the camera recordings, and indeed, half an hour before Ahmed's van drove by, the same camera had recorded a dark sedan moving towards the mansion. The license plate was not visible. The camera was old, and the quality was poor. But they were able to determine the make approximately. It looked like a Honda Accord or a Toyota Camry, both common models. Investigators compiled a list of all similar cars registered in the area. There were 1,300 of them. They began checking the owners, looking for connections to Saeed, Ahmed, and Daniel. One of the detectives noticed a call log on Saeed's phone. 3 days before the fire, he had received a call from an unknown number, an unregistered, prepaid SIM card. The conversation lasted 2 minutes. It was impossible to determine who had called or what they had talked about. But the same number had called Ahmed the day before the fire. It couldn't have been a coincidence. Someone else was coordinating their actions, or threatening them, or making arrangements. The police tried to locate the phone using cell towers. They were somewhat successful. The calls came from the Washington area, but they couldn't determine the exact address. The number was no longer in use after the night of the fire. The phone had apparently been thrown away or destroyed. The detectives returned to the women. They asked if they had seen anyone else besides Ahmed, Daniel, and Saeed. Oksana remembered that a few days before the fire, someone else had gone down to the basement. A woman. Young, around 25 to 30 years old. Dark hair, thin, spoke with an accent, possibly Eastern European. She came with Ahmed, examined the women, and wrote something down in a notebook. Oksana thought she was a buyer, that they were being checked before the sale. The woman asked questions, where they were from, how old they were, if they had any illnesses. Oksana refused to answer. The woman shrugged and left. Oksana didn't see her again. This was a new lead. The investigators asked Oksana to describe the woman in more detail. She was tall, about 170 centimeters, slim, with shoulder-length, straight, dark brown hair. She had an oval face, a small nose, and thin lips. She was dressed modestly. Jeans, a dark jacket, and sneakers. No jewelry, as far as Oksana could remember. The police compiled a photo fit based on Oksana's description and began their search. At the same time, they checked Saeed's financial transactions. Bank statements showed that he regularly withdrew cash, $10,000 to $15,000 a month. These were large sums, unusual for ordinary purchases. Most likely, he used this money to pay Ahmed and other participants in the chain. But there were also transfers, several transactions to offshore accounts through shell companies. Investigators were unable to immediately determine who owned these accounts. International inquiries were required, and that took time. One of the transactions caught their attention. A month before the fire, Saeed transferred $50,000 to an account belonging to a company registered in the British Virgin Islands. The name of the company meant nothing. It was just a string of letters and numbers. But when investigators began to dig deeper, it turned out that this company had ties to several other entities in Eastern Europe, in Moldova, Romania, and Ukraine. All of these companies were involved in recruitment in one way or another. Officially, they were employment agencies that helped people find work abroad. But in reality, many of them were fronts for human trafficking. The police contacted Interpol. It turned out that several of these agencies were already under investigation by law enforcement. They were suspected of recruiting women for sexual exploitation. But there was not enough evidence, so no cases were opened. Now the investigators had a concrete lead. They requested information about the employees of these agencies, photos, data. One of the profiles matched the photo fit of the woman Oksana had seen. Her name was Elena Rusu, 32 years old, a citizen of Moldova. Officially, she worked as a manager at one of the agencies in Chisinau. But according to Interpol records, she had been detained several times in different countries on suspicion of human trafficking, but each time she was released due to lack of evidence. Investigators began searching for Elena Rusu in the United States. They contacted the Immigration Service and found out that she had entered the country on a tourist visa 2 months before the fire. She flew back to Moldova a week after the tragedy. Her whereabouts are currently unknown. Moldovan police reported that Elena had not appeared at her place of residence, and her phone was not answering. Most likely she went into hiding, knowing that she would be hunted down. But her role in this story was becoming clearer. Most likely, Elena was the coordinator. She connected agencies in Eastern Europe with buyers in the United States. She recruited women, arranged for their delivery, and checked the merchandise before handing them over to clients. Said was one of those clients. Ahmed acted as a local intermediary. He met the women, brought them to the mansion, and controlled them. Daniel provided medical assistance to keep the victims in relatively normal condition. Zhang mapped out the entire chain. At the top was Saeed, who financed the operation and used the women for his own purposes. He may also have sold some of them to other buyers, although there was no direct evidence of this yet. Below him was Elena Rusu, who recruited and transported victims from Eastern Europe. Further down was Ahmed, who did the dirty work on site. And at the very bottom was Daniel, who helped keep the women alive without asking questions. But who started the fire? That question remained unanswered. Ahmed swore he didn't set the house on fire. Daniel was at work. Elena had already left the country. That left one possibility: someone else, whom the investigators had not yet found. Or Saeed himself. Maybe he really had decided to kill himself, and Yana just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Lawson ordered an additional examination of the scene of the fire. Experts returned to the burned-out mansion and conducted a detailed analysis. They discovered an interesting detail. On the bedroom floor, under a layer of ash, they found shoe prints, a partially preserved sole print, size 43, men's shoes. The tread pattern indicated Nike sneakers. The experts compared them with Saeed's shoes. He wore size 42, not a match. So there was someone else in the bedroom. This clue gave investigators a new lead. They checked Ahmed's shoes. Size 44 didn't match. Daniel's, 43, a match. But Daniel was at work, his alibi confirmed by video recordings from cameras in the building where he worked that night. He couldn't physically be in two places at once, unless he had an accomplice. The detectives returned to question Daniel. They asked if he had a partner, someone else who could have come to the mansion. Daniel denied it. He said he worked alone and didn't involve anyone else. But when Lawson showed him a photo of the shoe print and said that the size matched his, Daniel turned pale. He paused. Then he said he had a brother, a younger brother, 19 years old, named Kyle. Daniel sometimes gave him his old shoes, including sneakers. That changed everything. The police immediately began searching for Kyle Corrado. It turned out that he was a freshman at a local college studying business administration. He lived in a dorm on campus. When the detectives arrived there, he was not there. His roommate said that Kyle had left a few days ago, saying he was going to visit relatives. He didn't say when he would be back. Investigators contacted Kyle's parents. They had divorced many years ago. His mother lived in Pennsylvania, his father in Ohio. Both said they hadn't seen their son in several months. He hadn't visited them. The police put out a warrant for his arrest. The detectives returned to Daniel. They asked where his brother might be. Daniel said he didn't know. They weren't very close and rarely communicated. Lawson asked directly if Kyle knew what was going on in the mansion. Daniel hesitated, then admitted that yes, he did. Once, Kyle came to his house, found a medical bag, and started asking questions. Daniel told him that he was doing some side work, helping people who couldn't go to the hospital. He didn't mention the women in the basement, but Kyle wasn't stupid. He guessed that something was wrong. He insisted that Daniel stop. He said it was dangerous, that he could get arrested. They argued. Kyle said that if Daniel didn't stop, he would take care of it himself. Daniel decided it was just talk and didn't think much of it. Lawson asked when that was. Daniel replied, about a week before the fire. Everything coincided. Perhaps Kyle decided to take action. Maybe he went to the mansion to free the women, or to scare Syed, or to get Daniel out of this story once and for all. But something went wrong. Maybe Syed caught him. A fight broke out. Kyle grabbed a can of gasoline. It was in the garage. Syed used it for the lawnmower, and in a fit of rage, he doused the bedroom and set it on fire without thinking about the consequences. Or maybe it was cold-blooded murder. Zhang checked Kyle's phone records. The day before the fire, he called Daniel several times, but Daniel didn't answer. Then Kyle sent him a message. "I'll take care of it myself." Daniel read it but didn't reply. He thought his brother was just threatening him to scare him. He didn't think Kyle would actually do anything. The search for Kyle continued for several days. His photo was sent to all states, and cameras on roads, at airports, and at bus stations were checked. Finally, information came in from Texas. Local police detained a young man resembling Kyle at a gas station near the Mexican border. He was trying to buy food with cash and was acting nervously. When the police asked for his ID, he tried to run away. They caught up with him, handcuffed him, and checked his ID. It was Kyle Corrado. He was taken back to Virginia. For the first few hours, he remained silent, refusing to speak without a lawyer. When the lawyer finally arrived, Kyle began to testify. He confessed to setting fire to the mansion. He said he didn't want to kill anyone. He just wanted to save the women. He knew his brother had gotten involved with bad people and decided to put an end to it. On the evening of September 12th, he drove to the mansion. He parked his car in the woods and walked the rest of the way. He saw that the lights were on in the house. He knocked on the door. A man opened it, said. Kyle said he was Daniel's brother and had come to talk. Said, "Let him in." They went into the living room. Kyle asked where the women were. Said was surprised and said he didn't understand what he was talking about. Kyle raised his voice and demanded to see the basement. Said refused and told him to leave. Kyle didn't leave. Instead, he started looking for them himself, went into the kitchen, opened the door to the basement, and went down. He found the wine cellar and found a hidden door. He went down to the second basement. He saw the women. He wanted to free them. He tried to break the chains, but they were too strong. The women screamed and begged for help. Kyle ran upstairs looking for tools. Said blocked his way. He had a gun in his hands. He told Kyle that he had made a mistake, that now he would have to pay. Kyle was scared. He grabbed the first thing he could find, a can of gasoline that was standing by the garage door. He swung it at Said. Said fired, but missed. The bullet hit the wall. Kyle threw the canister at him, spilling gasoline on the floor. Said slipped and fell. Kyle ran upstairs to the bedroom, where he thought he could lock himself in and call the police. But Yana was there. She was screaming, demanding an explanation. Kyle tried to calm her down, saying that the police would be there soon. But Said had already climbed the stairs, banging on the bedroom door, threatening them. Kyle panicked. He saw the gasoline that had spilled on his clothes and shoes. He took out his lighter. He smoked and always carried it with him. He thought that if he created a fire hazard, Said would back off. He spilled some gasoline on the floor by the door and flicked his lighter. The fire ignited instantly, faster than he expected. The flames spread across the carpet and shot up to the curtains. Kyle tried to put them out, but couldn't. Yana screamed. He grabbed her by the hand and tried to pull her out the window, but it wouldn't open. The old frames were stuck. Smoke filled the room. Kyle was suffocating. He rushed to the door and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Said had locked it from the outside and propped it with something heavy. Kyle banged on it and screamed, but his strength was fading. The last thing he remembered was falling to the floor and losing consciousness. He woke up on the street. At first, he didn't understand how he got there. Then he remembered. The window had broken from the heat, and he had fallen out. Or crawled out, he couldn't remember. He stood up and looked around. The house was on fire. Flames were bursting out of the windows. Kyle realized that Yana was still inside. He wanted to go back, but couldn't. The heat was too intense. He heard sirens. The fire department was on its way. He was scared. He ran to his car, got in, and drove away. He didn't think about the consequences. He just ran. Investigators listened to his testimony. They checked it. The story generally matched the evidence. A bullet lodged in the wall on the first floor confirmed that there had been a shootout. The shoe print in the bedroom matched Kyle's size. The clothes he had worn that night were in the trunk of his car, covered in soot and smelling of gasoline. The DNA on the fabric matched his DNA. But Kyle's version raised questions. First, if Said locked the door from the outside, how did he himself die in the fire? Experts returned to the scene and examined the bedroom door. It had indeed been propped open by a heavy dresser that stood in the hallway. But the dresser was not completely burned, and it could have been moved. Perhaps Said blocked the door to prevent Kyle from escaping, but then he himself did not have time to escape. The fire spread too quickly, blocking the way to the stairs. He returned to the bedroom, trying to escape through the window, but suffocated first. So did Yana. Their bodies were found together. Second, why didn't Kyle call the fire department immediately after he got out? He explained that he was panicked and afraid and couldn't think clearly. The lawyer insisted that it was an accident, that Kyle didn't want to kill anyone, that he acted out of good intentions, trying to save the women. The prosecutor objected, saying that Kyle deliberately set the room on fire, knowing that there were people inside. It was murder, albeit unintentional. The case was sent to court. Kyle was charged with the unintentional murder of 2 people, arson, and trespassing. Daniel was charged with complicity in human trafficking and unlawful detention. Ahmed was charged with human trafficking, kidnapping, unlawful detention, and aiding and abetting. Elena Rusu remained at large and was charged in absentia with organizing human trafficking. 5 women from the basement received medical care and psychological support. 3 of them were deported to their home country. They did not have legal status in the U.S., although human rights organizations tried to obtain temporary visas for them as victims of crime. 2 others, Marina and Oksana, agreed to stay and testify in court. They were given witness protection and temporary asylum. The investigation was still ongoing. Investigators were trying to find other members of the chain, those who helped recruit women in Europe, those who financed the operation besides Saeed. International requests were slow, and bureaucracy slowed down the process. But Lawson and Zhang did not give up. They understood that this case was just the tip of the iceberg, that there were dozens, if not hundreds, of similar schemes out there, and they wanted to destroy them all. The story of Sheikh Saeed al-Mahdi and his basement in Virginia did not receive widespread press coverage. The Sheikh's family used their connections to minimize media attention. A few small articles appeared in local newspapers, but the major publications avoided the topic. Officially, this was explained by the fact that the case was under investigation and disclosure of details could interfere with justice. Unofficially, it was due to pressure from influential people who did not want Saeed's name and his connections to human trafficking to become public knowledge. But for those directly affected by this story, the women who survived the nightmare in the basement, the investigators who uncovered the crime, the families of the victims, it remains an open wound.